Shir Mispar 2. Second.
Okay. The first shir today was about Parsha Para. This shir now is actually about Parsha Chodesh, which is next week. Got that? In preparation for Pesach. But when you look at all the different Parshiot about Passover, there's one that sort of no one pays attention to. I think that was the title, wasn't it? What was Pesach, the forgotten Parsha about Passover? I think that was the title, something like that. Now, open up your Chumash to Perek Yud Bet and Sefer Shemot. Called Parsha Chodesh. It's famous, isn't it? Who made Parsha Chodesh so famous? Remember? Yeah. The first Rashi in Chumash tells you that Chumash really shouldn't start with Breshit Bara Elokim, but rather what? It start with HaChodesh Zelechem, because it's the first mitzvah. Chapter 12 in the book of Exodus. Sefer Shemot Perek Yud Bet. Chapter 12. I'm sure we're all familiar with it, right? Now, ask most people, what's the first commandment that the Jewish people received? What would they tell you? Rosh Chodesh, right? Parsha Chodesh. But if you look carefully, that's not a commandment for everyone to keep. Who needs to know who who decides when the year begins? The Sanhedrin. Not everyone makes their own calendar. Now, the first commandment that Am Yisrael received is really awesome. You know why? It's to take initiative and form a group. Understand? What's the first commandment? Look at Pasuk Gimel in Perek Yud Bet. I'm going to skip the first two psukim. God talking to Moshe, tell Bnei Yisrael the following. But God tells Moshe, you and Aaron, you decide that this month of the spring is the first month. From now on, that's going to be month number 1. But in Pasuk Gimel, Daber Bnei Yisrael v'amartem, what's it say? Vichu, on the 10th of the month, Vichu sel beit avot sel bayit. What's going to be the buzzword? Bayit. It's called the Jewish home. What I want to claim is, what's going to come up in the next 13 psukim, or next 12, 11 psukim, till Pasuk Gimel, are the laws of what? What laws are going to follow now? The laws of Pesach, right? Now, what I wanted someone to say was the laws of Korban Pesach. Yeah. Why is that the wrong answer? Because it's never called Korban Pesach. Because it's not a korban, it's the first family meal. I call it korban. It's the first Shabbos meal. What's a proper Shabbos meal? When you invite people, you prepare, you come properly dressed, right? You have a menu, and you sit down and talk, and you schmooze about, hopefully, about a better future. Yeah? You know what our ancestors did way back? At the first family meal. First I think they invited everyone to come and join. What am I talking about? Remember, how do we start Magid? Halach ma'anya. Remember, we take the matzah and break it, and we use it as an icebreaker. You know what an icebreaker is in camp?
Yes.
An icebreaker is when you have all these people sitting together, like new campers, and you want to start a conversation. You take some object, say, what do you think about this? Got it? What's this look like to you, or something like that? So when I take something to start a conversation, I'm using the matzah, the broken matzah, to start a conversation, which the rabbis call lechem oni. How do you say conversation, bread in Hebrew? Lechem oni. Because what's conversation? Ba'anita v'amarta, remember? La'anot is to answer. It's also lechem oni, which is our bread of affliction, because how do you say affliction in Hebrew? Oni, it's also poor man's bread, because it's called lechem oni. You understand the wordplay? Halach ma'anya? No. The word, it's only once in Chumash. It can mean all three. But our Seder begins with, we take the matzah and we start a conversation about our affliction in Egypt by eating poor man's bread. Why is it poor man's bread? Because after you buy it, you're poor. Now, remember, this is the bread that we ate in Egypt. When did Am Yisrael eat matzah in Egypt? In Egypt, not Libya. On the way out, we ate matzah, right? Do we ever eat matzah in Egypt?
Yeah.
When?
You serve it. It's a type of bread you serve to slaves because you don't.
That's according to your kindergarten teacher. Okay. and that's if matzah is what you have left over in class from 2 years ago. You didn't have the heart to throw out, right? Right. Lechem matzah in Chumash was simply pita. Was ishtanor. What's that called? Lafa. It wasn't the cardboard stuff. They couldn't make cardboard back then. Yeah, it's lafa. Yeah, as opposed to bread. It's quicker. Okay. If you ever see how they make pita, it's nice and easy. Now, but if you look in Perek Yud Bet, look in Pasuk Chet in Perek Yud Bet. Just jump ahead of it. How do we eat the Korban Pesach? What's it say? Tzliesh u'matzot. Right? When we bring this Pesach arguing, this I call it the first cookout, right? What do? We eat the meal in Egypt with what? With matzah. Right? Matzah and maror. Why are we eating it with matzah? To remember how we left Egypt? It can't be, right? So the matzah we eat with the Pesach has nothing to do with leaving Egypt. Right?
Yeah, why not?
What?
The Pesach, isn't that about leaving Egypt?
No, it's not.
Well,
listen, let me show you a little halacha, okay? As long as you have Perek Yud Bet open. Fast forward to Pasuk Chaf Aleph, okay? After God tells Moshe in the first 20 psukim what Moshe needs to know, Moshe tells the people what they need to know. See in Chaf Aleph, what's Moshe tell the people? Mishchu cholem tzol lebetach, and how to sprinkle the blood. And then Moshe becomes a Zionist. I'm sorry. Yeah. He says, here's what you need to do here in Passover. How about next year? Look in Pasuk Chaf Daled. What's it say? Yeah. What's it say? Pasuk Chaf Daled says as follows. Perek Yud Bet Pasuk Chaf Daled. Okay? Ushmartem et hadavar hazeh, which is Pesach, right? L'chok l'chal v'nech ad olam, forever. Vayaki tavo la'aretz. Okay? So when you come to the land of Israel, which God's going to give you, as He promised, Ushmartem et avodah azot, which is what? Pesach, right? And every year we bring Pesach. It's called Passover. Now, Vayakim ro lechem b'lechem ma'avodot lechem. Let's say your child asks you, why am I bringing Passover? Do we tell him to remember that we left Egypt? No. V'martem zevach Pesach hu asher pasach Hashem al batei b'nei Yisrael v'tzayim v'nakot mitzayim v'beteinu u'tzion. Passover is to remember that God passed over our houses. And let's say that evening, God only saved us from Makat Bechorot. And let's say we didn't leave Egypt that evening. Let's say we only were saved that night from Makat Bechorot. We left Egypt a week later. Will we still keep Pesach? Why? Dainu. If God only saved us from that and didn't do the next step? In other words, if your children ask you, does that answer your question? Yes. Pesach is not to remember how we left Egypt. Pesach is to remember Asher Pasach. That's what the word means. What holiday reminds us of how we left Egypt? Chag HaMatzot. That's a whole 7 days. That's going Meshuggah. You follow? But Pesach is once a year, a family meal, a Thanksgiving dinner with special cuisine. Cuisine. Understand? It's a thematic meal. Got it? With a conversation. Now let's go back to the Kol Dichvin. So the first time we ate matzah, command eat matzah, the Chumash says, is at the first Passover. And what do we have to do with each other? We had to invite one another to make sure there's enough people to eat a whole lamb, which means you have to invite your neighbors. Or if you have a big family. But you don't eat it by yourselves. It's got to be a big meal. Prepared 4 days ahead of time, by invitation only. It's not to limit people, by invitation only. It's to make sure that everyone comes prepared. It's all set up. And, special, it's like a Thanksgiving dinner. And there'll be a conversation. Now, what did our ancestors say to one another at the first Pesach? Right? First they invited, how did they do Aramaic, I guess? How did they invite one another to join in the Pesach? Kol dichvin, yete v'yechol, kol ditzich yete v'yifsach. Got it? That's not what we're doing. Remember, halachmani is not an invite. Why can't it be an invite? Because everyone's sitting down already. Right? If you make kiddush, you make karpas, something like that. You have a wine stain on your Haggadah already. But what is it? We're quoting our ancestors, what they said to one another the first time they ate matzah. What did they say to one another? First they invited one another, and then what was the conversation about? Right? Hashta hacha l'shana ba. So this year we're here in Egypt. Next year we hope to be in land of Israel. Hashta avdei l'shana ba b'nei chorin. That's not what we're saying. We're quoting what our ancestors said at the first Pesach. And how do we begin Magid? By connecting our Seder to the first Seder. You with me? You understand halach ma'anya? Didn't you hear the question, how come we're inviting people now? Right? What? That's the Rambam. So okay, but that's different gear so. But what I'm getting at is that it's got to be that we're quoting. We're not inviting people. It doesn't make sense to invite people now. We're starting a conversation and we're tying our Seder to the very first Seder. Because what was it about? About recognizing we are now and talking about a better future. That's the idea?
Seder, was done before Makas B'choros, right? Wasn't that done the night of before?
In preparation for it, yeah.
In preparation.
But knowing that Vayalachem Adam Lo'ot, to show God you're worthy of being saved, I need to perform the ritual.
So that was another reason to stay indoors when you were
God says, don't leave until the morning, right? Vish updates. We'll need this later on. Sim Pasach Chav Gimel. What's it say? Vish, no one leave the house until morning. But we didn't. We left earlier, didn't we? We'll see why if we have time. Anyway, let's get back to. Right. Okay. Anyway, let's take a look again. Here's what I want to do. Whoa. Okay. Makat B'chorot. Yeah. One time I was teaching Parshia Breshit in yeshiva, and what happened? I said no. We were talking about what God did, and God made sense to be light. And I said, can God create darkness? He said, no, God can make light, but darkness is a lack of light. Yeah. So I said that God can't create choshen. And then as I said that, there was chashmal. Then I realized I was wrong. And then somebody pasuk in Yeshayahu, and Yeshayahu says God's borei choshech also. Yeah. So borei choshech. That's in Isaiah. And I guess what happened? I guess the bicycle ran over the electricity line. Okay, so I'll do this share by heart in the meantime, and we'll continue in a minute. So let me go back. So in Parshat HaChodesh, there we go. There we go. Okay. There was light. Okay. So in probably the hot water thing overflowed. There's always every Shabbos always happens. Yeah. Back to Pesach. Now look at Perek Yud Bet again. Okay. And the first 20 psukim, God talks to Moshe about the laws of Pesach in Egypt, right? Then we'll talk about Chag HaMatzot. We'll see in a minute. And then Moshe tells the people about Pesach. Got that? No. That takes us to Pasuk Chavtet. What's in Pasuk Chavtet? The famous story of the Exodus, right? So as you said, we bring Pesach in preparation for Makat B'chorot, and we're all ready. And the story, the narrative of Pesach Dorot, of Makat B'chorot happens from Pasuk Chavtet until where? Oh, it's a long story. It takes us all the way till Pasuk Membet, right? Now Shimurim, the whole thing. Okay. At the end of Perek Yud Bet, almost no one pays attention to. See that? Look in Pasuk Mem Gimel. See from Mem Gimel to Nun, there's another little set of laws. You see that? That we never pay attention to. Unless you're about Korah in the 6th day of Chalamod. Yeah. Now, what's it say there? We're going to read that now, okay? V'yomer Hashem and Moshe ve'Aaron, Zot Chukat HaPasach. Have it? Chapter 12, verse 43. Yud Bet Mem Gimel. V'yomer Hashem Moshe, Zot Chukat HaPasach, Kol ben Nechal lo yochabo. These are the laws of Pesach. We'll see whether it applied in Egypt in a minute. But law number one is, if you're not Jewish, you can't eat it. Kol ben Nechal. Got it? Now, why is Pesach only for Jews? There's a big question. Can you invite a non-Jew to your Seder? Ask your local rabbi. And there's a big question. For sure, a non-Jew can't partake in Korban Pesach. Can he eat matzah? Can you feed a matzah and mohar? Ask your local rabbi. It's a great discussion. I'm not a halacha teacher, but it's a great discussion. Nowadays, yeah.
How about with all these mixed marriages? To the Seder.
Yeah, I guess you can. The question, may you? Okay. What? No, so you can find ahead there. But when it comes to the Pesach, right, You know why?
In the baked.
No. What is Pesach commemorating?
Our freedom.
What's Pesach commemorating? That's a good question. What's it commemorating? I'll give you a hint.
I just thought you said
What?
the passing over Hashem Makas Bachoros.
Yeah.
Passing over our house.
So we're thanking God for saving us, right? Now, we just read Pasuk Mem Gimel, right? Back it up to, go back to Pasuk Mem. You know what? Start from Lamed because it's famous. Remember, I'm sorry. Go to Lamed Vav, just to refresh your memory. Lamed Zayin. I'm sorry. Lamed Zayin. Bnei Yisrael travel from Beis Sukkot. We leave Egypt. We get thrown out of Egypt by Pharaoh. Remember, go serve your God. And we did some 600,000. And Erva followed us, etc. Pasuk Lamed Tet. We didn't leave with matzah. We left with dough. Remember, we took the dough and ran. Now, why didn't we bake the dough before we left?
No time.
Why didn't we have time? Egypt didn't let us. They were rushing us out to go serve our God to stop the plagues. So we didn't have time. So we took the dough with us. And the next morning, what did we make for breakfast? We had nothing to eat because we weren't prepared. It was all last minute. The only thing we had was the dough. So the next morning, what did we have for breakfast? Dough. I mean, we made dough on a makeshift. We didn't have oven, so we made it like on a tabun. So we took the batzek, ugot matzok kilo chametz. Okay, why? Because we were thrown out of Egypt, Kiroshim Mitzrayim, and we couldn't linger, and we had no other preparation. Understand? What do we have for lunch? Matzah. What do we have for dinner? And the next day for breakfast? Yeah. And how do we remember that experience? Because that was the only thing we had to eat. When I teach 18-year-olds, I'm going back 20 years. When people, before there was all this packaged stuff, people came to Israel for a year. The most popular thing was instant oatmeal. Remember those instant oatmeal packets? Yeah. They didn't have them in Israel, or it cost $100 a packet. But in America, they were cheap. And yeshiva food was always bad. So like the easiest thing to make was instant oatmeal. Remember? Anyone remember talking about? Yes. So yeah. Now if you came like 30 years ago. So someone who spent their gap year in Israel and lived on instant oatmeal, got it? 10 years later, when they see instant oatmeal, what's it remind them of? Their year in Israel. Got the idea? That was when a certain type of food is associated with a certain experience, and therefore eating matzah and only having matzah, right, day after day, reminds the people of what? Of leaving Egypt. Got it? And therefore, how are we going to remember the experience? That's called Chag HaMatzot. And eating matzah reminds us how we left Egypt. Maybe we'll talk about more in detail. Pesach is for something else. Pesach, remember that God saved us from Makat Bechorot. Now look in Pasuk Mem. What happened? We finished the story of the Exodus. We're on our way out. And we have, I call the deep voice narrator, or Morgan, what's his name? Morgan Freeman? You know, in the movie. Sometimes in Chumash we have a story, and sometimes we have the deep voice narrator. You know what I'm talking about? It's like a movie, like, you know. So here's the deep voice narrator saying what? Umoshav b'nei Yisrael asher yeshvu b'mitzrayim 30 shana ב-400 shana. That's not part of the ongoing narrative. That's a statement, a concluding statement, isn't it? Right? Ever since we've been living in Egypt for how long? 30 and 400 years. And then, in case that wasn't clear enough, ויהי מקץ 30 שנה ב-400 שנה, ויהי בעצם היום הזה יצאו כל צבאות השם מארץ מצרים. והשמרים אל השם, כן? כל הלילה זה שמרים לכל בני ישראל וכל תורתם. Why are we summarizing 30 and 400? And 430. Why? What's that remind you of? 400 years is Brit Ben Abtarim. So basically, Brit Ben Abtarim is when God made his first covenant with Avraham Avinu. And what did God promise to do? To watch our history. Before anyone did anything wrong, remember? Before we sold our brother, anything. In the first dialogue between God and Avraham Avinu, in chapter 15 in Bereshit, God promised Avraham Avinu, you'll have children, just wait 20, 30 years, be patient, but you'll have children like the stars in the sky, and you'll get the land of Israel, but be patient, wait 400 years. Remember? Remember how God started? Don't worry, I'll tell Abraham, I'll protect you, but there's what to worry about. God says, don't worry, you'll have kids, it'll just take a long time. You'll get the land of Israel, it's going to take a real long time, not in your lifetime. But God says, I'm going to watch your history. You're going to be in someone else's land, you're going to be oppressed and enslaved. Everyone knows Brit Ben Abtarim, don't you? and then after 400 years, or after this long time period, I'll get you out of there. I'll punish your oppressor and take you out, and then you'll conquer the land. And then you can redeem that experience by remembering how to behave, how don't do to others what they did to you. We did that share last time about Parsha Mishpatim. Remember, echoes of the Exodus. Now, we just summarized 400 years, and basically, what did God just do, basically? He fulfilled Brit Ben Abtarim. Agreed? Now, did God make any other Brit with Avram Avinu in Sefer Bereshit other than Brit Ben Abtarim? In Brit Ben Abtarim, God said was Yud Kei Vav Kei and promised to watch our history. It'll be difficult, but I'll watch you through it and keep it going. Was there another Brit that God made with Avram Avinu? Brit Milah. Why is it called a Brit? Well, Brit doesn't mean circumcision. Brit means covenant. Remember the covenant of Brit Milah? I'll be your God, you'll be my people. That's the Brit B'Shem Elokim. Now, there's only two Britot in Sefer Bereshit between God and our forefathers, right? One B'Shem Elokim in Yud Kei Vav Kei. They come together all the time. They have in Parsha Ba'era. And therefore, there's this very important law that what? If every year we're going to thank God for fulfilling Brit Ben Abtarim, because we want God to watch our history all the time, how do we thank God for fulfilling Brit Ben Abtarim? Pesach, you follow? And the key moment of Pesach, when God punishes our oppressor and saves us, that's Pesach, got it? In order to be worthy to celebrate Pesach, to thank God for Brit Ben Abtarim, how do we prepare? We have to make sure to fulfill Brit Milah. You follow? Because it's covenantal, it's only for members of the covenant. That's why a non-Jew can't keep Shabbat. If Shabbat is an oath brit of our covenant, only members of the covenant. Remember the crazy law? It's Shabbat is an oath brit. By definition, can't be kept by someone who's not part of the brit. And therefore, we're going to find two laws that are connected. If you want to bring Pesach, you have to do Brit Milah. No other law, no other mitzvah goes that way. There's two mitzvot in Chumash, only two mitzvot say that if you don't keep them, you're chayav karet. What are they? Pesach and Milah. Why? That's not a punishment; it's a consequence. Because they're both symbols of the covenant, of the two covenants. You understand why karet is a consequence? Because you have a chance to identify with the covenant, and you don't identify with the covenant. So, and that's why those two. But the two mitzvot come together, don't they? I read in the book of Joshua, I think, in Yoshua, remember? Doesn't Yoshua, they crossed the Jordan, I think, on the 10th of the month? Of the first month? Surprise, surprise. Right? And what do they do before they bring Pesach? They have Pesach. Remember, that's Haftarah, I think we read on the first day of Pesach. That's a nice choice for Haftarah, isn't it? On the first day of Pesach. Right? What? Yeah. So we have Milah, remember? And then Pesach. They go hand in hand. It's so important that it gets its own Parshia. Got it? You follow now? I just gave half the answer. But now look again now in Pasuk Mem Gimel. I'm trying to explain why is Chumash dedicating a separate Parshia for what basic law? That Brit Milah and Brit Ben Abtarim go hand in hand. Now we have to see when this law was given. Okay, let's read it carefully, okay? Zot Chukat exists only for the future or also for the first Passover. Let's take a read. Here's the law of the Pesach. Kol ben echad lo yochabo. No going allowed. Again, for the Pesach. Matzamar, that you could argue. Now, kohevet ish mignat kesef u'maltoto az yochabo. If you have a live-in, a domestic, what they call, that you own, know the domestic? Who's from South Africa? Somebody? Okay. What's a domestic? It's like a live-in, a live-in servant. Okay. So then he can eat it, but on what condition? In other words, that's what's called an Eved Kanani. If you have, there's a law that you can't keep an Eved in your home if he's not circumcised. Promise you have a year, otherwise set him free. Okay. But if you have just a part-time worker, he can't eat with it. He can't try. He can serve you, but he can't eat it. Okay. All in the same house. Stay home, can't go out in the middle. Okay. Don't break bones. Basically, these are laws for how to eat the Pesach. It's a joint. It's the whole nation of Israel. You understand the idea of our national korban. Okay. Then we have a strange law. Try to understand it. Pasuk Mem Zayin. Have it. What's that mean? So there'd be a stranger. Is he Jewish or not Jewish? He's not Jewish. He's a stranger. Okay. Vasa Pesach doesn't mean he made Pesach. He's not allowed to, right? But he wants to bring Pesach. Understand? That's all the Parshim understand it. You ever make Passover? Make Pesach? I'm making Pesach this year. So you'll see later on, it's not by chance we say that, because the verb asiyah and Pesach always goes hand in hand. I'll bring you an example in a minute. But if a ger who's not Jewish wants to bring Pesach, he can't. Why can't he? He's not Jewish. No. Therefore, what's he need to do? Okay? But he wants to bet. He has to convert. Got it? And what's conversion? The same thing Avram did. Mila's conversion. Got it? Then he can bring it. You follow? And then what's his status? Then he gets what status? He gets Ezrachut. He gets his Tudat Zehut. That's my point. I think this is conversion. Okay? It's not, but if you're aware, you can't eat it. Sort of summarizing it. Okay, now listen carefully. Torah chat yeh le'ezrach v'lager gar b'tochachem. What is all the way through Chumash now? When I have a ger who converted, he always has the same name. He's called Hager Gar B'tochachem, as opposed to Ger Asher B'Sharecha, Ger Asher B'Kirbecha, all those different ones. Those don't have to be Jewish. You have to be nice to them. But Hager Asher B'Tochachem, that's the convert. V'nisach lecha ad b'nei Yisrael v'lager Hagar B'tocham. If you remember Yom Kippur, if you're a Balkori, you remember. V'ytazot lechem l'chukat olam b'chodesh hashvi b'asod l'chodesh tanu nafshotechem. Anyone remember? V'chol b'lcha lo yasu ha'ezrach v'hager gar b'tochachem. Kiv Yom Hatzot. Remember learning that? There's Hager gar. Who needs Yom Kippur? You don't need. If you're not Jewish, you don't need Yom Kippur. Whenever remember v'nisach lecha ad b'nei Yisrael v'hager gar b'tocham. That's Par Halam Davar Shatzipor when Seder makes a mistake. It's in Perek Tetvav in Bamidbar. He has to be Jewish. So whenever you have the phrase Hager Gar B'tochachem, he's a convert. Or when it says Kager Ke'ezrach. Now, what's the difference between a ger and an Ezrach? Ezrach is someone who has land rights. You follow? Now, who has land rights in Israel? Only a member of the 12 tribes. Why? Because when did the 12 tribes get their land? When we conquered the land. By definition, a ger, who's a male, can never get land. Why not? He's not part of a tribe.
And it goes back,
So
back to the tribe.
And Yovel goes back to the tribe. And therefore, he always, that's why we have to be extra nice to him. But he's not in Ezrach, but he's Hager Gar B'tochachem. So whenever you have Kager Ke'ezrach, it's always, when it says ger and Ezrach together, it's a Jew, whether he's, we'll see it in a minute. We'll see by Pesach in a minute. Can a non-Jew eat chametz? Yeah. A stranger, a stranger, a ger toshav. A ger is not converted. Not a ger tzedek. Can he eat chametz?
In your house?
No, in general.
He's not Jewish, yes.
Okay, so take a look. Go back to Perek Yud Bet. We'll get back here in a minute. Look at Pasuk Yutet, at the end of the commandment. Okay, it says, see Pasuk Yutet. This one costs us a lot of money. Shivat Yamim, Solo Yimatzeh B'Batechem. For 7 days, not only do you have to eat matzah, but you can't have any leaven in your home. Why? Ki kolchem machmetzet, v'nichrota nefesh shehi mi'adat Yisrael, b'ger u'b'ezrach haaretz. You never pay attention to that.
That's talking about Jews.
It's got to be Jewish. Why? Because what's his punishment if he doesn't? If he has chametz?
He gets soul severed. But if
Karet. You can't get karet if you're not Jewish. You understand my definition? You can't have, if you're not Jewish, you can't get karet, because karet means you're cut off from the covenant. So this guy has to be Jewish. Now, what's the havamina? So if he's Jewish, of course he can't eat chametz. What's the havamina that the ger might be okay to eat chametz? Why would ger be different? He didn't come out of Egypt. No, he didn't come out of Egypt. So because there's a havamina, maybe he's not included. Now, what we just read now in the end of Perek Yud Bet, does that make sense now? What I'm saying, there's conversion. What's conversion? Milah. There's a havamina in the Gemara that when you convert, you have to bring Pesach right away. Not on Pesach, right away you bring Pesach. We don't hold that way, but that's what it sounds like. But we do milah and mikvah, we learn from Har Sinai. Now, so then it says, go back now to Pasuk Mem Tet. Torah chad yelachem lesrach v'leger gar b'tochachem. I just defined the ger gar b'tochachem. That's the convert. Stamager is a regular stranger. Now go back to Pasuk Nun. We're back at the end of the parak. Listen carefully. V'yasu kol b'nei Yisrael kasher tziv Hashem et Moshe v'et Aaron ken asu. When did that happen? What's that prove? When did they do this? Before we left Egypt or after we left Egypt? It had to be before. So therefore, this whole section, where does it belong? It belongs earlier. You with me? These laws apply to Pesach Mitzrayim. Now, could anyone, for sure it applies for future generations. But it was given to them before we left Egypt. For some reason, where does Chumash record it? At the end. Keep that in mind. You with me? Now, I want to claim it's not the first time in Chumash or the last time we're going to have a section that's out of chronological order. In case you didn't catch on, that's what Chumash just does it all the time. Keeps me in business. Now, and then we go back we have to summarize in Nun Aleph to show that we're going back where we left off, and Etzem Yom Hazeh Hashem. Now, to appreciate why it's out of order, we got to go back now to the beginning of Perek Yud Bet and look at the commandments God gives Moshe. So let's go back now to Parsha Chodesh and try to understand. Okay. So Perek Yud Bet. So God tells Moshe Chodesh, we read Pasuk Gimel. Tell the people on the 10th of the month. Sell a beit avot, sell a bait. Remember, have your home, get your house set up. If mimata bait miseb lechachu shchino akrova bita bechsat nefashot ish lefiyachot tochasalaseh. That's exactly called dich v'nei tevitz. Understand? That's exactly the need to invite people and have a big meal. Set tamim. What's tamim mean? We talked about that before, didn't we? Tamim, perfect. Bake a good one. Zachar ben shana yelechem min hakfasim min ha'izim tikachu. From your sheep. Okay. Bayelchem nemishmeret. We keep it for safekeeping till when? Till the 14th of the month. And then we shech it, everyone together. See, it's like a group korban. The whole nation's doing it in the evening. Okay. Pasuk Zayin. We sprinkle the blood on the doors, and that's going to save us later from the makkah. Pasuk Chet. What I want to claim is, it's not a korban, it's a cookout. How do you say a cookout in Hebrew? A zebach. Yaakov made a treaty with Lavan, didn't he? Don't they make a zebach bahar? They make a monument. They take 12 stones. Remember what they call that place? Yagar Sauduta. Yaakov called it Galed. Remember? They make an agreement. You don't mess with my daughters. We put up a border. I'm on this side. You're on that side. We're not going to be friends, but no belligerence. It's a solution for the Middle East. And who's going to judge who's right and wrong? Let the gods argue the moral issue. Remember? Lavan sure that he's right. Yaakov sure that he's... Remember the speeches they get back and forth? Lavan says, what do you mean? I put you into business. You're nobody without me. I gave you everything. You ran away from me. Remember Lavan's great speech? Yaakov's that rotten... And Yaakov's speech, you treat me like a piece of dirt. That's how the Middle East... Every side has their narrative, and every side sure they're right. Yeah. How do we solve it? We make a treaty. And who's going to decide who's right and wrong? Elohei. Let Elohei Abraham and Elohei Nahor argue it out. Remember? You spoke to him, Elohei Vechem. Yeah, we'll make a thing and let the gods argue the moral issue. How we got off track, but it's important. No. What I'm getting at is zebach. They sit down and have a zebach. They sit to meal together. A zebach is a cookout. A zebach l'Hashem, that's in the mikdash. When you share a meal with God, that's a shlamim. But a zebach, it's a family meal. Now, why did people treat it like a korban? Because we sprinkle blood, got it? But there's no mizbeach, is there? So some people say the mizbeach is like the home. I think it's the other way around. Later, the temple. This is the format for the temple. It's not that it's that when we go to the Beit HaMikdash, the Mizbech reminds us of Korban Pesach, not the other way around. Because Korban Pesach is foundational. It's the Jewish home that's important. In other words, you leave the Mikdash to build your home. You visit the shore of the Mikdash to build your home, to remember what your home should look like. That's why everything we do in the Mikdash is the same thing you do at home. You eat meat, you have flour, you have wine, you have candles, you have a table, you show off your bread. Things like that. That's the idea of. That's why Korban Pesach is so important, because it's not the first. It's not the classic Korban. It's the first. I call it the first Shabbos meal. Now let's go back to. That was Pasachet. Now we eat the basar that night with Sleish Matzot. Now why with matzah? That's a big question, isn't it? Why am I eating Pesach with matzah? We didn't leave Egypt yet, right? No, we have 2 weeks to prepare. No one's in a rush. Big question, isn't it? We'll answer it in a minute. It's got to be roasted. It's got to be well done meat. No, basically, sit down to a proper meal. It's the Yesh al Rosho. And no leftovers. When it says Lo Titur Men HaBoker, what happens when there's no leftovers? Does that enhance the meal or doesn't enhance the meal? Go to those all-you-can-eat meals. Especially with 18-year-olds. It's a much better meal when you know there's no leftovers. Then people eat. No one's going to save it for tomorrow. Meaning, it's enhancing the meal to make sure everyone eats as much as they want. And then, now, why do we have to be all dressed up? So people say because we're leaving Egypt, right? We don't leave Egypt until the next morning, correct? Moshe is going to say, no one leaves the house till the morning. I think it's a Shabbos meal. Why come dressed up? Because it's a Shabbos meal. You follow? You come properly dressed. Chipazon doesn't mean 4 minutes to eat a whole matzah. You follow? Chipazon means with eagerness and readiness. Meaning, don't sit. Come excited about the meal. Got the idea? It's not the speed you eat it at, but chipazon means with eagerness and readiness. I'm just trying to show you that this first Pesach is a family meal. It is primarily a family meal where we're about to go free. Before we go free, we have to sit and talk about where we're going, where we're coming from, what our goals are. And that's why it's so important. But if you don't have food, no one's going to sit and talk. No. Then, Pasuk Yibet. V'avarti be'eretz Mitzrayim b'laylahu v'kiti kol b'chor. Got it? V'yadam lechem la'ot. You need those. You have to show God you're worthy of being saved. And then, I'll see the dam u'pasakti alechem. Remember? I'll skip over your house or I'll protect you. Okay? Then, now, that takes us to Pasuk Yud Gimel. Ad b'til now it's called Pesach Mitzrayim. That was nice and simple. That's my first point. It's a family meal. About a better future. That's the first thing. How about the future? Look in Pasuk Yudalid. Try to understand it. Vaya hayom hazeh lachem l'zikaron. This day has to be a day to remember. V'chagotem oto chag l'Hashem l'dorotechem chukat olam t'chago. Celebrate it, right? For all generations, a chukat olam, forever. Now, what's it referring to? What holiday is this? Pesach Dorot, right? Is that Chag HaMatzot or Pesach? Is this Pesach Dorot or Chag HaMatzot L'Dorot? Unclear, right? Now, what's Hayom Hazeh referring to? What's this day? Vaya Hayom Hazeh. Yeah. What day could it be? Well, it could be Rosh Chodesh. Someone might say about that possibility last year. But he said, we were discussing the story, and he said, Yocham Rosh Chodesh. Remember? Tamad Lomar Bayamahu. You know what I'm talking about? You mumbled that at your Seder, didn't you? What's that? We're obligated to tell the story. I might think that my obligation to tell the story, or maybe Pesach begins when? On Rosh Chodesh. Why? Hayom Hazeh Mitem is B'Chodesh Aviv. Who cares what day? It's this month, and do it as soon as the month begins. Make sense? At Tamad Lomar, we'll see later Bayamahu.
Yeah, your wife says the same thing.
Okay. Maybe on the day, or maybe during the day we tell the story. On the 14th on the day, and the 15th? So why do we do it at night? We'll read about it soon. Okay? Didn't you talk about it at your Seder last year? You just mumbled, had no idea what you were talking about, right? It's called davening. No. So we'll leave Pasuk Yudalid alone now, but Yudalid is a transition now for Dorot, isn't it? We're going to celebrate this for all generations. Now listen carefully to Tet Vav, a new holiday. Now, is Pasuk Yudalid summarizing the first section, Pesach Mitzrayim, and now we do Pesach Dorot? Or is Yudalid introducing another holiday? Big machloket parshanim. We're not going to take sides. I want to show you both possibilities. But listen carefully now, Tet Vav. Shivat yemim matzot tochelu, ach b'yom harishon tashbitu somi batechem, ki chol chal chametz v'nichrota nefashim yisrael miyom harishon b'yom hashvi. We have a holiday for 7 days we eat matzah. Got that? And what can't you do? You can't have chametz. Why not? Because you have to eat matzah, right? I think so. Now, Pasuk Tet Zayin, have it? Yom HaRishon Mikra Kodesh, the first day of the holiday, on the 15th, what do? You have a time of gathering. Yom HaShvi Mikra Kodesh Yelechem, Kol Melacha Lo Yaseh Behem, Ach Asher Yechol L'cho Nefesh Hu Levar Lo Yaseh Lechem. This is a law for the future, isn't it? It's a 7-day holiday. The first day, the last day are Yom Tovim. Understand? And what do we do for the 7 days? We eat matzah, and we can't have chametz. Agreed?
Go to the park.
Okay. Pasuk Yud Zayin. Ushmartem et hamatzot. What's that mean? Be careful to watch over the matzot you're eating. We'll see what it means later in a minute. Why do we have to keep eating matzah? Why? Ki be'etzem hayom hazeh hotzeit yetzivotechem me'eretz Mitzrayim ushmartem et hayom hazeh dorchem mechat olam. Why do we eat matzah for 7 days? Because what happened? On this day, God took us out of Egypt. What's wrong? We didn't leave Egypt yet, right? Now, if this commandment was given after we left Egypt, it would make perfect sense, right? But before we leave, on Rosh Chodesh, 2 weeks before we leave Egypt, does it make sense? Yeah. Why? Do you understand the problem? Why is God telling Moshe about Chag HaMatzot L'Dorot to remember how we left Egypt if we didn't leave Egypt yet?
Preparation.
Okay, so all the Parshia asked the question, so it could be God knows the future. He wrote the book. It could be. Moshe needs to know the future. But keep that in mind. But the way God's talking, it sounds like it happened already. Now, to make things more complicated, Barishon, Ba'basar Yom HaChodesh Ba'erev Tuchlu Matzot. What are the 7 days? Starting in the 14th in the evening, which we call Leil HaSeder, right? We start eating matzah until when? Ad Yom Echad Esrim B'Chodesh Ba'erev. Shivat Yamim, Soy L'Tzeh B'Techem, you can't eat chametz, and then Kol Machmetzot Lo Tochelu, B'Chol Moshe Techlu Matzot. Now, I think there's 7 times in Chumash where it says eat matzah for 7 days, doesn't it? It says that a lot. Shivat Yamim Matzot Tochelu. Ask your local rabbi. Are you chayav to eat matzah for 7 days? No. Ask your doctor. Right? Okay. Yeah. The rabbis, maybe because of Pikuach Nefesh, right? Even though it says 7 times in Chumash eat matzah for 7 days, what do they say? You're not chayav. When are you chayav? Only if the first night. And what pasuk do they quote? Where's that from? Look again in pasuk Tet Zayin. See how awesome the rabbis are. Look in pasuk Tet Zayin. Yom HaRishon Mikol Kodesh Yelechem. I'm sorry, wrong pasuk. Where's it? I need big pasuk. Yud my mistake. Yud Barishon, in the first month, Ba'basar Yom LaChodesh Be'erev Tochlu Matzot Ad Yom Echad V'Asim LaChodesh Be'erev. What's that pasuk saying? We eat matzah for how many days? For 7 whole days. What do the rabbis do to that pasuk? In the pasuk they say eat matzah for 7 days. They truncate it. And what words do they quote? Be'erev, which is followed by a comma. They dump the comma. See in the middle of the pasuk Be'erev Tochlu Matzot? Who remembers learning that we're only chayav the first night? Shenemar Be'erev Tochlu Matzot. Didn't you learn that? Anyone learn Gemara, right? But you never looked up the pasuk. The rabbis are messing with you, aren't they? Right? In the very pasuk that says you eat matzah for 7 days, right? We truncate 3 words in the middle and say you're only chayav in the evening. They're onto something. Got it? And not just for your health. It's like, does anyone paskin that we're supposed to work 6 days a week? It says so, doesn't it? But no, you can work 6 days a week, but Shabbos you can't work. Got it? You can eat matzah for 7 days. What can't you do? Yes, what I'm getting at, the main commandment, that's the rabbis are right on the mark. The main commandment is not eating matzah. The main commandment is not eating chametz. Boy, isn't it? It's more, not eating chametz is way more important than eating matzah. And now the question is going to be why. Do you follow what we just did? I'm trying to show you. And the rabbis are onto that with their drasha. But you see in the last 2 psukim, Shivat Yamim So'ol, these 7 days, no chametz. Why? Because if you eat chametz, you're cut off. Whoa, chayiv kareh. If you're only asur chametz to make sure you eat matzah, then what's the big deal? But it's more important not eating chametz than eating matzah than kol machmetzot lo tochelu. Instead you eat matzah. Why? Let's go back to our first question. Why are we eating matzah with the Pesach? If that meal, the first Shabbos meal that we just talked about, is our first family meal that has a theme. And what's the theme? We're thanking God for taking us out of Egypt. It's called Geula. what's the purpose of Gula? The purpose of, that's Gula is the third cup. The fourth cup is is to get to Har Sinai, to become a nation, and to live properly in the land of Israel. Now, what's required? If the purpose of redemption is not just freedom, let's say the purpose of redemption is to serve God. It might say it also. Someone said we were once idol worshippers. God took us out to serve God. I think in Shmoneh Esrei Yom Tov, someone said, "V'ke'avtenu malkeinu la'avodotecha." We're not consumers, we're employees. God took us out of Egypt to serve Him. Now, to serve God, what's the first thing we need to do? Get rid of your bad habits. Now, if we're leaving Egypt, we're not just leaving Egypt. Egypt's culture was decadent. Decadent is the word? Was disgusting. But if you remember Chazal, if you remember Yechezkel, we were immersed in Egyptian culture. What's the first thing we need to do to be worthy of leaving Egypt? We have to make a statement that we're getting rid of our Egyptian culture. Now, how do you do that at a meal? Anyone remember when it was probably 30 years ago when the French did something that no one liked? I forgot what it was already, but people said French perfume stinks, and we had freedom fries instead of French fries. What was that? I remember something like that. What was it?
President Bush after 9/11.
Something like that. Something the French didn't join the war against the mass weapons in Iraq or something. Whatever it was. But when you're anti something, you're against their symbol. Now, if you look in Wikipedia or study anything about leaven, right? Who invented leaven? Who invented bread? Who invented beer? Egypt, right? Yep. Bread was so important in Egypt. There was a minister in the government in charge of bread. Wasn't there? Remember he had a dream? Bread in Egypt was a big deal. They invented things, and they were known for their bread. Now, why is there so much bread in Egypt? What do they have that we don't have? Remember, they have Nile, they have sun. Sooner or later, that sun and all that wheat, it's going to ferment. Somebody's going to figure out about it. Happened, got it? But they become the experts in bread making. Bread is the symbol of Egypt. It's called kimut. Now, if I want to have an anti-Egyptian meal, what can't I have? No chametz. But I have to have bread because I'm having a meal. I have to wash. I have to eat bread because you eat bread with the meal. So I need meat. Now, I need meat because I need a Shabbos meal. I need meat and I need bread. But it's got to be symbolic. I need salad also. So what salad am I going to get? Bitter salad. Remember? Charif. But because I need salad. But it helps the meat, doesn't it? That's why the best maror is lettuce, isn't it? That horseradish is horseradish. You know where that came from? That's so Ashkenazi. They didn't have lettuce up in Europe. All they had was those little, what are those things called?
Brussels sprouts?
Yeah, but they had a little green on top. You follow? That's how horseradish came about. You knew that or not? Check your history about that. But the proper maror is lettuce, isn't it? That's getting posed. Lettuce is much better. It's not cool, but it's not. But ask your Sephardi neighbors. Now, the malach is that way also. Maror is better, lettuce is good. Now back to what's the meal? The meal is anti-Egyptian. First and foremost, it's a meal. Got it? I need meat. I need bread. I need salad. But I got what meat? Why? Because that was the Egyptian god. I read somewhere that if before all this happened, if the Jews would shech a korban in Egypt, a sheep in Egypt, wouldn't we get stoned? Remember that story after the fourth plague? What's Moshe Pharaoh? Pharaoh says, go serve your God in the land. No, if we brought a korban in the land, they'd stone us, remember? Because that's an Egyptian god. So my main course is going to be an Egyptian god. Okay? I'm going to eat with anti-Egyptian bread, and to remember, do you understand the symbolism of the Thanksgiving meal? Okay? Now, and that's why, now, l'dorot, when I'm thanking God for my redemption, I need to remember not only that God redeemed me, redeemed me, I need to remember my job. And what's my job? To be worthy of redemption, we have to get rid of our chametz. Got the idea? And therefore, what's more important? There's all the laws of chametz are all the laws of idol worship, aren't they? Idol worship. Can you have hana? Can it be in your house? Can you own it? You have to burn it. You follow? For 7 days, chametz becomes a symbol of, you name it, it's bad. You follow? Whatever, pick your hashkafa. Whatever's bad, in your understanding of Judaism, whatever's bad behavior, that's what chametz symbolizes. It began as a symbol of Egyptian culture, and now it becomes a symbol of whatever's bad. Ask your is it Yetzer Hara? Is it, you name it. You follow? And therefore, if I'm going to remember once a year my redemption from Egypt, and thank God for redemption, I need to remember now why I was redeemed. I have to show God I'm worthy of redemption. How do we do that? That's getting rid of your chametz. Got the idea? And therefore, what's more important? Not eating chametz is more important than eating matzah. Got the idea? Ask your local rabbi, are you chayav to eat matzah for 7 days? Who cares what Chumash says? Because they understand Chumash much better. It's called Pshuto. Then they're on the mark, you follow? Because Chumash is highlighting, I'll prove it to you in a minute. Now, all this God tells Moshe Rabbeinu on Rosh Chodesh, right? But the last 5 lines don't make sense. Only afterwards. What should Moshe tell the people now? What God told him. What does Moshe tell the people in Pasach Chaf Aleph to Chaf Chet? What laws? Pesach Mitzrayim and Pesach Dorot, right? What doesn't he tell them? He doesn't have. Why can't he tell them about Chag HaMatzot? They haven't left yet. When did they leave? And the rest of the parak, and the rest of the parak Yud Bet. You with me? Now, we're out of Egypt, aren't we now? We're out of Egypt. What do we have for breakfast? Go back to Lamatet. They took the betzek and they made matzot because they were rushed out. Got it? Then we have the section of this insert of Mem Gimel to Nun, which should have been recorded where? Earlier. For some reason it's here. And now, in Perek Yud Gimel, what's Moshe have to tell the people? We just left Egypt, right? It's the morning after. Listen to Perek Mem Gimel. Perek Yud Gimel. It's in your tefillin, but you never read it inside. Listen. Perek Yud Gimel. Everyone have it? Chapter 13 in Shemot. Vaydaber Hashem Moshe lemor, Kadesh li kol bechor, Peter kol rechem b'fnei Yisrael, b'adam b'yimei lihu. Set aside for me every firstborn. Got it? Animal, human. Got it? Everyone knows Kisha Bechor? What should Moshe do now? Tell the people what? The laws of Kisha Bechor. He doesn't do that until Pasuk Yud Aleph. See Yud Aleph? The laws of Bechor, Moshe doesn't tell the people until Yud Aleph. What's he tell them first? Look in Pasuk Gimel now. Now, after we leave Egypt, Moshe will tell the people the laws of Chag HaMatzot. Listen how he says it. Listen to Pasuk Gimel. Everyone with me? Okay. V'yomer Moshe la'am, Zechor et hayom hazeh asher yetzatem mitzrayim mibeit avadim, ki b'chol sekia leotzi etchem mizeh v'lo yichal chametz. Remember the day you left Egypt. How do you remember the day? By doing what? Buying chametz. Now, is this a once-a-year commandment or everyday commandment? It's got to be once a year. Why? Because lo yichal chametz is only once a year. And what day is this? Well, we're not sure yet. But Hayom Hazeh, this day. Okay? Hayom etem yitzim b'chodesh Aviv. It's in spring. So what might I think? Maybe the mitzvah is in the spring. Keep that in mind. You with me? Okay. But Yaakov, now we left Egypt. He says, remember this day that we left Egypt. What happened on that day? Remember we ate matzah, the whole thing? We were rushed out. Remember this day by doing what? By not eating chametz. That's the introduction. Now we're going to get the details. It's in the spring. Now Moshe is going to explain what he meant. Pasuk Hey. When you get to Israel, do this avodah this month. What avodah, Pesach, or matzah, we'll see in a minute. Pasuk Vav. Shivat yamim tochal matzot, v'yom hashvi chag l'Hashem, matzot yechel shivat yamim, v'lo yechel chametz, v'lo yechasor b'chol gvulecha. What did Moshe just explain? How did we remember this day we left Egypt? By doing what? By eating matzah for 7 days and not having chametz. But what's Moshe emphasized? The main mitzvah is not eating matzah, is lo yechal of chametz. Got that? Now, the people who left Egypt, when they eat matzah, what's it going to remind them of? For the next 10, 20 years, when people see matzah, what are they going to remember? How we left Egypt, right? How about 50 years later? Well, what do? We eat matzah. Why? I don't know. Our parents know exactly what it meant. Right? But what's going to happen 50, 100 years later?
We enter Israel.
We have the same commandment, but what do? Vigat levincha b'yom hahu. You tell on what day? Huh? On the day that you're remembering the Exodus. Got it? Huh? What do you tell your children? Bavur zeh, for the sake. What's that referring to?
Because of this.
This what? This matzah. Asa shamli b'seiti mitzrayim. Why did God do all these miracles when coming out of Egypt? For the sake of this matzah. What? Are we supposed to explain to our children why God took me out of Egypt, or why am I eating matzah? What, according to this pasuk, what do we tell our children? Why did God take us out of Egypt? In order to do what? To eat matzah, it says here, doesn't it? If it says referring to the matzah, it has to be referring to. Okay? It says, for the sake of this matzah, God took me out of Egypt. That doesn't make sense, does it? And that's why Ramban says you have to turn it around and say, Zeh ba'avor. Explain to your children, I'm eating matzah, remember how God took me out of Egypt. Rashi disagrees. Ibn Ezra disagrees. What do they say? You got it all wrong. What do we tell our children? The reason why God took us out of Egypt was to eat matzah. Not just matzah, but to keep the mitzvot like eating matzah. How do you spell mitzvot in Hebrew? Matzot and mitzvot is the same word. Depends how you put the vowels in there, doesn't it? What Ibn Ezra is adamant. He says, that's pshat, bavors, I'll prove it to you in a minute. The reason why God took us out of Egypt was to do what? To keep his mitzvot. Means we're not thanking God for our redemption. Right? That's expression of gratitude. Hakar sato. We're not celebrating Passover to remember that God took me out of Egypt. Remember why he took me out of Egypt. To become a nation. And to make that memory meaningful, it has to come hand in hand with what? With getting rid of your bad behavior. You follow the idea? It's two different tfisot about Judaism. One, are we consumers? God did us a favor, we have to say thank you every year. Or the main thing, we're remembering God took us out because we're employees. Remember Gula's the third cup, not the fourth cup? The fourth cup is getting Tar Sinai and getting the Torah. Got that idea? And therefore, it's when we thank God for our redemption, our freedom, it's not just to say thank you, it's to act thank you. And part of acting thank you begins first and foremost getting rid of your bad behavior and taking on something new. Now, what do you need to do every year? You have to sit down to a meal and you have to have a conversation. Conversation about what? About that we're chosen and why we're chosen, and how we serve God as a people. But you need mitzvot. You follow? You need ritual. Got it? But it's got to be meaningful. It's got to come with the conversation. And therefore, what did we learn the Seder from? Bigat levincha. What do we do with the Seder? We explain to our children why I'm eating matzah, or why God took me out of Egypt.
Yes.
So, want to see the proof? We'll end with one quick line. Open up Devarim Perek Vav. Okay, we'll end with this. I'm trying to show you there's two Parshia out of order. Eating matzah for 7 days is brought earlier. You know why? Because it only makes sense that later, but I'm connecting getting rid of my chametz with why I eat matzah with the first Pesach. And the one about kol harei, but that's to connect Brit Ben Abtenim and Brit Milah together. That's Chumash is moving Parshiot around for thematic reasons. But if I want to know why God took me out of Egypt to keep the Torah, open up Perek Vav Pasuk Kaf. You know it by heart, don't you? Let's say you come. Moshe's talking in the 40th year, isn't he? What's he saying in Perek Vav Pasuk Kaf? Ki shacha bincha machar lemor, ma idot v'chimish basher tziva Hashem Elokeinu otanu. Tanu or etchem? Okay. No, etchem. I'm just joking. Okay. Now, remember whose question is this? This is the Chacham's question. It's in the Haggadah, right? What did we answer the Chacham? Learn Mishnah. Teach Mishnah. Because in the Haggadah, he's a nerd. He's not a normal kid. He wants to know what are the laws. Ma means what. In Chumash, the kid, he's a normal kid. He's not asking what are the laws. What's the question here? Why do we have to keep the laws? What's the answer? V'mata levitcha, v'dim ha'inu comes from here. Now, listen to when your child asks you, why do we have to keep all these laws? What do we tell our children? V'dim ha'inu is not why we keep the laws. That's beginning our history. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and God took us out of Egypt b'yad chazakah, and God did otot maftim b'faro leinenu, v'otanu hutzi misham, l'man havi otanu eretz hazot. God took us out to bring us to the land. Continue. ויצווינו להשם לעשות חוקים אלה בלירת השם אלוקינו טוב לנו כל הימים ושתקעתי לנו כי נשמור כל מצוות. Why did God take us out of Egypt? To get to the land of Israel. To do what? To keep the Torah mitzvot. Isn't that exactly Rashi? Got it? What do you tell your children? What do you tell your children? The reason why God took us out of Egypt was to keep the Torah. That's purpose. You follow? That's not saying thank you. That's acting thank you. That's remembering the purpose of redemption. And that's why not eating chametz is more important than eating matzah. And just one last proof, as long as you're in Sefer Dvarim, Perek Tet Zayin, you know by heart. Remember Shmor Chodesh Aviv V'asita Pesach Hashem Elokecha, and you go to Hamakom Asher Yivchar Hashem. Remember, once a year in the spring you bring Pesach. Remember, Perek Tet Zayin. Look in Pasuk Gimel. Okay. When you bring Pesach once a year, Pasuk Gimel, Lo Tochal Alav Chametz. Got it? What's the main thing? When you bring Pesach once a year, first and foremost, no chametz. Got it? Therefore, what? Eat matzah for 7 days. Lechem oni, conversation bread, or remember, it reminds you of your affliction. Okay? Why? What's the purpose of yearly celebration? Remember, the goal is the memory shapes our behavior every day. Once a year, I recharge. We talked about that once, didn't we? We gave the Mother's Day analogy, didn't we? Remember, we celebrate every day's Mother's Day, but once a year we celebrate to remember every day's Mother's Day. The memory of the Exodus shapes our day-to-day behavior as a Jew. It's understanding why we're chosen and how we have to behave. Once a year, I recharge that memory and make a big deal about it. But the goal of the yearly memory is the daily memory, called the schira. It's one big mitzvah. That's why it's a recharge once a year in the spring or a booster shot. But the main goal is the daily memory, which we do every day, don't we? Well, yeah. Don't we mumble this at the Seder? Remember that guy was hitting 70? Never understood why we stayed every day and every night? Until his Rebbe said, open up the Chumash, remember? Remember Ben Zoma told him, what pasuk does Ben Zoma quote? Everything we just did is our own year. We did Yocham Rosh Chodesh, we did Rabbi Menachem Leibtag, I'm hitting 70. We did Avadim Ayinu. You see why we answered the Manishtan to Avadim Ayinu? Remember the end of the Haggadah when we say, every generation has to be like the one out of Egypt to hold over the door. And how do we know? Shenemar, V'otanu Utzim Misham, which is right here from Devarim Perek Chavav. So we start with if you know your Devarim, it's like Haggadah makes so much sense. Otherwise, you're just jumping pages. Anyway, that's a whole share on Haggadah. We're not going to do now. But I want to share with you today is that little thing of Chukat HaPesach. I'm juxtaposing Brit Milah to Brit Ben Abtarim at the end. It belongs earlier. Chag HaMatzot to remember how we left Egypt. Belongs later, but I moved it earlier to tie it to why I'm eating matzah with the Korban Pesach. Because if I'm thanking God for redemption, I have to not just say thank you, act thank you, and that begins with getting rid of my bad behavior, and then accepting a whole new way of life. Okay, we'll stop here. But thank you, and everyone should have a Chodesh Tov and a Geula. What? Not by me, but somebody else is giving. This goes to here. Thank you.